It took the jury less than 3 hours, 6 weeks of testimony, thousands of pages of evidence, the entire country watching. And 12 people in Walterboro, South Carolina walked back into that courtroom in under 3 hours and convicted Alex Murdaugh of murdering his wife and son. 2 years later, the South Carolina Supreme Court threw it all out. All 5 justices, unanimous. They said that the trial was tainted and Alex Murdaugh would get a new one. And now the man who admitted to stealing millions of dollars from his own clients, who lied to police, lied to his family, lied to everyone, basically, could walk free on the murders that put him away. 3 years after Alex Murdaugh's double murder trial ended with 2 life sentences, the South Carolina Supreme Court on Wednesday granted him a new trial in the killings of his wife and son. Murdaugh's defense team argued that a court clerk tampered with the jury in the original murder trial, because the person running the jury had been working it from the inside. Becky Hill was the Colton County Clerk of Court. Her job during the 6-week trial in early 2023 was to manage the jury. She was shopping for a book deal at the same time. The book was called Behind the Doors of Justice: The Murdaugh Murders. Hill was already in talks with publishers before the verdict came in. And after the trial ended, jurors started coming forward with sworn affidavits describing what she had said to them throughout the process. Juror Holly Miller said Hill told the panel they were going to hear things that would throw them off. "Don't let it distract you," Hill said. "Don't be fooled by Murdaugh's testimony." She allegedly pushed them to reach a quick verdict. And in what may be the most troubling detail of all, Hill reportedly had private conversations with the foreperson throughout the trial, a foreperson whose placement Hill had allegedly engineered herself by manipulating the dismissal of another juror earlier in the proceedings. In their court filing, the defense lawyers said, Defendant Richard Alexander Murdaugh moves the court for a new trial after discovering that the clerk of court tampered with the jury by advising them not to believe Murdaugh's testimony and other evidence presented by the defense, pressuring them to reach a quick guilty verdict, and even misrepresenting critical and material information to the trial judge in her campaign to remove a juror she believed favorable to the defense. The woman in charge of protecting the jury's impartiality had been steering it toward a verdict she could write about. In December 2025, Hill pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, perjury, and 2 counts of misconduct in office. She walked out with probation. The sentencing judge put it on the record that her punishment would have been far harsher if prosecutors had proven her interference actually changed the outcome. The Supreme Court of South Carolina did not need that proof. In their unanimous opinion, the justices wrote that every person is entitled to a fair trial with an impartial jury, untainted by external forces bent on influencing it toward a biased verdict. They called what Hill did stunning interference. They said she had placed her fingers on the scales of justice. The state, they ruled, had failed entirely to rebut the presumption of prejudice. Not a close call. The court said the trial was rotten. Overturning a conviction does not mean a man is innocent. The evidence against Alex Murdaugh has not disappeared as the case does not go away. What the ruling means is that he stands before a new jury in a new trial with the same evidence minus the clerk whispering in the hallways. So the question the prosecution now has to answer is a straightforward one. Can they do it again? Because when you strip away the spectacle of that first trial, the packed courtroom, the years of tabloid coverage, the Netflix documentaries that turned the Murdaugh name into something people recognized in grocery store checkout lines, what you see is a case that multiple legal experts called largely circumstantial, well before a verdict was ever reached. The strongest piece of evidence the state has is a video. On the evening of June 7, 2021, Paul Murdaugh filmed a short clip at the family's dog kennels at 8:44 p.m.
The video looks like inside maybe a kenneled area with a fence around it and a dog, I believe to be a lab, where he's trying to take a video of the tail of the dog.
Okay. All right. And that's what you see in that video.
Yes, sir.
What do you hear in the video?
You hear 3 different voices in the video. You can tell because they're so different, you can tell that they're different.
3 voices are audible in the footage: Paul's voice, his mother Maggie's, and a third.
Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth.
Bubba. Hey, Bubba.
That's a guinea.
Alex told investigators he was not at the kennels that night. He held to that story until witnesses identified the third voice as his. Then, under oath at trial, he admitted he had been there all along. He had lied about it again. Phone records showed Maggie and Paul's last activity at 8:49 that evening, and then nothing. Alex's own phone traced a careful path away from the property toward his mother's house. Investigators put the window between those last pings and his departure at roughly 17 minutes. 17 minutes in which 2 people were shot dead, and a man in a blue button-down shirt somehow became a man in a clean white t-shirt. A video from earlier that evening showed Alex in khakis, loafers, and that blue button-down shirt. When officers arrived after the murders, he was in clean shorts and a white t-shirt. He had told dispatchers he checked both bodies and tried to turn Paul over. The scene at the Mosley property was, by every account, catastrophic in terms of blood and biological material. His clothes had none of it. That evidence does not disappear in a retrial. It will all still be there. What might not be there is everything that surrounded it. Jurors in the original trial heard weeks of testimony about the financial crimes, the millions Alex stole from clients over many years. Settlement money taken from the family of Gloria Satterfield, a housekeeper who died on the Murdaugh property and whose sons never saw a cent of the payout made in her name. Fraudulent loans, fake bank accounts, systematic theft from people who came to him at their most vulnerable and trusted him completely. Financial crimes, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering. When the murder evidence arrived, jurors had already spent days listening to testimony about a man who had spent decades lying to and stealing from the people closest to him. The prosecution's theory was that Alex killed Maggie and Paul to buy himself time, as that financial house of cards came down around him. During oral arguments in February 2026, the Supreme Court justices raised concerns about whether all of that evidence was appropriate in a murder trial at all. Chief Justice John Kittredge described the volume of financial misconduct testimony as potentially concerning and questioned whether it had crossed into prejudicial territory. The defense will push hard for limits on it at the retrial. If a new judge agrees and pulls some of that testimony out, the atmosphere inside that courtroom shifts considerably. The jury is no longer sitting with a man framed from day one as someone who stole from grieving families and disabled clients. They are sitting with a man charged with 2 murders on largely circumstantial evidence, with no murder weapon and no forensic proof he pulled either trigger. Because that is the other thing. 2 people were shot multiple times at close range with high-powered rifles on a warm June night on a sprawling rural property in South Carolina. Forensic experts from both sides agreed on what that scene looked like afterward, and yet investigators found no blood on Alex Murdaugh's clothing. No gunshot residue placing him as the shooter, no fingerprints from Alex at the crime scene, no DNA. The lead investigator admitted under cross-examination that he had provided incorrect information to the state grand jury. The rifles used to kill Maggie and Paul have never been found. Not one. Investigators searched the property, searched the surrounding land, and came back with nothing. Defense attorneys Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin argued throughout the trial that SLED made up its mind early and investigated from that assumption outward. DNA recovered from the victim's clothing was never sent for testing. Fingerprints found near the blood were never collected. Other potential leads were set aside without explanation. On a jury that was being quietly managed by someone who wanted a conviction, that argument was not enough. On a new jury that walks in knowing what the last one went through, it lands in a different room entirely. There is one more problem, and it has nothing to do with evidence or legal strategy. Finding 12 people in South Carolina who have not already decided how they feel about Alex Murdaugh is going to be extremely difficult. After years of documentaries, podcasts, dramatizations, and wall-to-wall news coverage, the name carries a weight that is nearly impossible to separate from the verdict most people already assume is correct. Jury selection in 2023 took days. The second time around could take considerably longer, and every extra day is a reminder of how poisoned the well has become. The original trial sat in Walterborough, in the heart of Low Country, where the Murdaugh family had run the local legal system for 3 generations. Resentment ran deep there. People who had spent years watching that family make problems disappear, while ordinary people faced consequences. The defense will fight hard for a change of venue. And if they get one, if this trial moves somewhere without that specific history baked into the community, then the jury pool is a different thing entirely. People who know the case from television are not the same as people who grew up in the shadow of the Murdaugh name and watched it operate up close for decades. The prosecution is not walking in empty-handed. The kennel video is still devastating. The clothing is still damning. The documented lies about the alibi are still on the record. And Alex Murdaugh, in 30 years of public life in South Carolina, demonstrated consistently what he does when something threatens to be revealed, and that is to lie and stall. A retrial is a second chance to put that pattern in front of people who have not been interfered with. But the context going into this trial is not the same as 2023. The woman who managed the original jury is a convicted criminal. The highest court in the state said unanimously that the trial was corrupted. The financial evidence that built Alex Murdaugh's frame as a predator has been flagged as potentially excessive by the justices who ordered the retrial, and the defense has spent 3 years studying exactly where the first case broke down and preparing for every inch of it. In a largely circumstantial case, the credibility of the process matters as much as the evidence itself. That credibility is compromised now in ways it simply was not before. Becky Hill walked out of her sentencing with probation. Alex Murdaugh may yet walk out of a courtroom a free man on the murder charges, and a man who admitted to stealing millions from vulnerable people who came to him for help, who lied repeatedly to the investigators working his family's case, who by any accounting left destruction in the lives of everyone close to him. If the retrial ends in acquittal or collapses into a hung jury or grinds down through years of pre-trial motions, the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh become technically unsolved. Cold. A thing that happened with no one held responsible for it. And the Satterfield family and every other family Alex Murdaugh stole from and lied to will watch a man who wrecked their lives walk out of a courthouse and back into the world. The retrial is not just a legal proceeding for Alex Murdaugh. It is a test of whether South Carolina can protect its own process the second time around, after someone sitting at the very heart of the first one decided that her interests mattered more than the outcome. The system did not fail because of bad evidence. It did not fail because investigators cut corners, though they did. It failed because the people trusted to keep it clean looked the other way while one of their own put her thumb on the scale. The defense will say the system failed Alex Murdaugh. On that narrow legal point, they are correct. What happens to Maggie and Paul in the wreckage of that argument is the only question that matters now. And nobody, not even the prosecution and the Supreme Court that set all of this in motion, can tell you how it ends.